Welcome to Burning Questions, where we take a look behind the scenes with some of the most influential people involved in climate work and explore their personal journey, what they've learned, what's changed them, how they stay involved after years in the field. And the questions I ask are ones that I hear over and over from clients, from colleagues out in the community. And I've really created this as an opportunity to explore these essential questions together from a range of lived experiences and perspectives. I'm Leslie Davenport, your host and a climate psychology consultant, and I'm very excited to introduce today's guest today, Dr. Elizabeth Sawin. She's the director of the Multisolving Institute and a leader in systems change and climate solutions. She developed the concept of multisolving, addressing equity, climate, health, and economic vitality together after studying global examples of cross-sector innovation. Trained in system dynamics, she co-founded Climate Interactive and writes widely on leadership in complex systems. She lives in rural Vermont and is the author of Multisolving, Creating Systems Change in a Fractured World. Beth, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Well, let's start with we'd love to hear what your climate wake-up moment was, how you came to really understand the severity of what we're facing.
Yeah, I'm not even sure it's a moment or one that I can identify. Maybe a series of ratcheting steps, and I could name a couple points along the way. And for me, I would even describe what we're up against more broadly than climate change. So I think about, and really my whole professional career has been focused on what my mentor, Danella Meadows, and her colleagues identified as the human carrying capacity or the human demand on the Earth system becoming larger than the Earth could support. So that's both in terms of resource availability to feed and house and shelter people, and the Earth's ability to absorb and render wastes harmless. And so, I think about my career starting when I was a graduate student in the late 90s. I wasn't studying these questions. I was actually studying neurogenetics at MIT. But in my spare time, nights and weekends, I was volunteering with a group called Beyond War. And we were focused on, at that time, the really pressing situation of the Cold War, of nuclear weapons pointing at each other across the ocean between the Soviet Union and the United States. And so that was my entry point into activism, really, was that predicament. Beyond War took the stance that this wasn't just like a technological issue about nuclear weapons. It was about how we conduct ourselves as people. And so it had a big emphasis on conflict resolution. And the interesting thing was that it asked us as volunteers to consider that proposition in our own lives. So we actually had almost a pledge, which was, I will resolve conflict, I won't use violence. And I mention that, although it's not strictly climate change, because a theme as I look across the years of my teachers and my work is that the prescription for the world is also the prescription for our own lives. And so there I was, a very beginning activist, exposed to some wise thinkers on that. Beyond War transitioned into an organization called Foundation for Global Community. And that broadened, they kept their focus on peace and disarmament, but broadened it to global environmental threats like climate change. And I had a moment still in graduate school. I did a lot of my research at a microscope in the dark. So a literal moment in the dark of realizing it was actually what I was doing in my off hours that was what the world needed from me. I actually loved the research that I did. I loved the organism, the questions. But I realized that I was alive at a dire time, and a lot of people had invested in me to be a communicator and a scholar and a thinker. And so, long story short, I decided to apply what I was good at to those big problems. I finished my degree in biology, but I never became a professor. And instead, I went and worked with Donella Meadows on systems theory, computer models of global environmental problems. And we can talk maybe about where that path led beyond then. But so there is less a moment and more just an opening to a set of issues, I guess you would say.
Yes. Oh, it's so wonderful to hear because myself and I feel more and more of us are understanding what we're facing through the lens of a polycrisis and all the interconnections that you're describing and more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes down to our individual lives where we're buffeted by multiple challenges at the same time. So, the time that you and I are talking, we might be facing unusual weather and disrupted like supply chains or more expensive food and political polarization and authoritarianism. And it can feel overwhelming. It's sometimes clarifying to see those as many different fruits of the same problematic roots. Um, because that gives us more clarity. Doesn't make it easy, but it maybe provides more clarity to understand what we're experiencing.
Yes. Well, because in all the areas you're describing, there's so much harm and upheaval and risks and threats and pain. What have you found helpful that supports you in navigating the emotional side of this work?
Yeah, also a lifelong, career-long question for me. So if we start with where I mentioned in graduate school, and then we fast forward working with Danella Meadows, I started in the early 2000s. I was actually the same time Al Gore was carrying around his slideshow about climate change. I had a slideshow about climate change as well. I was going to church basements and town halls and a lot more low budget than Al Gore, but I was trying to explain to many people who it was the first time they were hearing about climate change. It's hard for us to remember what that must have been like. What I discovered was I was definitely opening people's eyes, but not in a way that did what I wanted, which was to activate them, to help us all take agents, to have agency and take action together. People would cry, they would freeze, they would leave the room. And I actually took a sabbatical. I said, I can't keep doing this. I'm not having the effect I wanted. My training as a scientist up until that point didn't equip me for my goal. And I felt I was doing harm. And so I put aside that talk for over a year. And one of the most important things I did was I went and studied with Joanna Macy, who I'm sure many of your listeners know Joanna's work, the work that reconnects, um, born out of that struggle of how to allow people to experience the emotions our society teaches us are quote negative emotions without paralysis, and to understand them as a source of intelligence, but also not a permanent state, but something to experience and move through. I had an amazing opportunity that I was smart enough to take, which was I was invited to spend a month with Joanna and her husband Fran on an island off the coast of Oregon. It was about 30 of us from around the world who just sat at Joanna's knees to learn her body of teaching. I left two little preschoolers at home with my husband to do that. It was a long time to be away at that stage. So that work I wove in my own way into my own work, and it allowed me to do better, to uh, I guess, welcome people into this knowledge of where we are and where we stand in a way where they were more likely to find their sense of power. But honestly, it was I who needed to do the work first, right? Like I now understand I was having that effect on people of paralysis and despair because I was to some extent paralyzed and despairing. So, um, just like the famous advice about the airplane to put on your own oxygen mask before you try to help others, that was something I needed to do. So the work that reconnects, which of course people can find online, and Joanna wrote many books that she left us about how to do this. The other side of it I would flag is uh, to the extent possible, living my own life in some kind of coherence with what I understood. And so for me, that has meant since the late 90s, living in an eco village here in Vermont with 23 other families. We share land and decision making and budgets and, trade tools and share childcare. My two daughters are in their mid-20s now, but their childhood was here. And so to that being able to go back and forth, my work for a time took me to the UN. So, the highest levels of climate policy, and then come back to my community and try to figure out how to get solar panels put on the barn roof. And like they were both hard. It took our community 3 or 4 tries to find the money and put together the infrastructure. And so it gave me a kind of patience to understand for the UN, like change is hard wherever you are. And so trying to do it on the ground has for me been a source of humility, but also happiness and challenge. And my husband and I grow a lot of our own food. So also deliciousness and fun and recreation. So those would be the things that we could. There are more, but the two big ones would be the work that reconnects and hands in the ground, feet on the earth, practical stuff.
It's so lovely to hear that cohesiveness because, as you know, so many of us struggle with living within a system that does harm and trying to navigate lifestyles and yet always up against limited choices, often in transportation, food, everything that you've mentioned.
Yeah, and I wouldn't minimize, many flavors of privilege that have made it possible for my family, to be able to afford some of these experiments. There's a combination. We've also, we haven't gone on, uh, you know, a vacation on an airplane for a long, long, long time. Like, so there are things we don't do as well as things that open up. And so, the mantra of divest, invest, you can apply that to your own life as much as to your stock portfolio or what you want your political leaders to do.
Mhm. Well, that's a good transition to my next question, which is a lot of people are looking for a way to make change and be involved in the shift that needs to occur. And you've described really beautifully what your path has been. Anything else you would like to add to people who are looking at ways to make a difference?
Yeah, well, we're talking about the polycrisis. And of course, that interconnected set of crises touches everything. And the beauty of that is that wherever we are, we have an ability to engage with the polycrisis. Um, Sometimes I have young people ask, what career ought they to choose in order to make a difference in these times. And I think it's much more a matter of doing what you're good at, what you're curious about, what brings you joy, because we need it. We need teachers and builders and architects and scientists. Each has something to bring to the moment. So I don't think it's a career path. I think it's a stance. Um, in my field, we often talk about the idea of a leverage point, and this was made famous by my mentor Danella Meadows, who wrote an article called "Places to Intervene in a System." For many years, I taught people how to identify leverage points. And a leverage point is a place where if you could change something in the system, you would unleash, a disproportionately large shift, a tiny little place to act that can change everything. What I found over many years of this was I could help people identify leverage points. Rarely could they act on them. They would say, well, my analysis shows if I was the president of the World Bank, I would know exactly what to do, right? But in fact, I've worked not with the president of the World Bank, but pretty, high level people. They also identify leverage points they feel like they don't have the power to push on, which is an interesting thing. They feel constrained by political systems or, like wherever we sit, this system doesn't want to shift. So I focus less on leverage points these days than on what I call, well, not I, what the field of complexity science calls coherence. And so coherence comes out of a study of fractals. It comes out of the way that there are self-similar patterns in nature and in society. And I write a lot about this in my book. It's hard to do it justice in a minute or two, but I these days look at our polycrisis as the manifestation of a battle between two sets of fractals. One fractal I borrow these words from the eco theologian Thomas Berry, the collection of objects worldview. That's words Thomas Berry coined, but that worldview brings us not just environmental devastation, but white supremacy and patriarchy. It says that, I matter and you're an object that I can use toward my own comfort, safety, well being, assumed well being. There's another fractal pattern in the world, and I call this one the web of relationships, which says, I'm sacred and special and unique, and so are you, and so is everyone else. And that the way we are safe is by, and make it through this, is by honoring and working with that mutuality and reciprocity. So the thing about that is, if you buy that, and you'll have to think about it a lot, to decide if you buy that analysis, but if you do, every moment, every choice in your day, you have those two patterns, right? I have a small company. In our staff meeting, am I going to be the boss who tells everyone what to do toward my own reputation and benefit? Or am I a collaborative leader who tries to nurture everyone? Two patterns. I get to choose where to put my energy. And I don't have to be the president of the World Bank, right, to take agency based on this pattern. When I do that, I also build a little tiny bit of muscle memory, the way that athletes visualize and practice. So there'll be a day, and I don't actually know when, it won't be staff meeting, but it will be a consequential moment where I will have, the ear of a leader or something that matters. Have I practiced how to be a collaborative leader? Why should I have, every staff meeting for a decade? I can practice it in my marriage. I can practice it in my policy work. So I think we got here with a question about like how do people find their place to act? All you have to do, in my experience, as I have this frame now, and I thank all the complexity thinkers who give me the language for it, um, is live your life. And your life is going to present you because it is an epic battle on this planet, those two patterns. Which one do you stand against and disrupt, and which one do you try to add your little tiny drop of steering and energy toward?
Yeah, beautiful. There may be differences here that we don't have time to explore, but what's coming to mind is the theologian Martin Buber's I-thou relationship.
If you're familiar with, yeah, I think that's another person, trying to capture that same sense, and it's not new in the planet. I mean, this has been a struggle, generational, hundreds of years at this point. And we really should also acknowledge, the cultures and the especially indigenous cultures that are the stewards and, are still living in intact cultures out of those principles of reciprocity and mutuality. So I just want to be careful and humble and not to say like a new thing I just figured out, not in any sense, but something we're all always free to try to join into.
It's so helpful to hear, though, how you've found these threads and sort of brought them into awareness and action and the ways they come together. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
You sort of answered this, but let me see if there's anything you want to add. Um, is there any kind of additional practice or quote or guiding principle that's just sort of your anchor that, it's something you can come back to over and over, given how large all of this is and the disruptions that can happen in our practices?
Yeah, I actually thought of 2 things, and I think so far, in my answers to your questions, I may be coming across as though, I've found some systems and they're working great, and I do the work that reconnects, and I grow strawberries, and I work with complexity, but, I'm human, and these are enraging, terrifying, grief-filled days, and I'm often really impatient. It's the other thing, 'cause um, just because of the nature of my work, I understand that every day is a loss if we don't turn the ship of species and possibilities. So I get impatient. And with that impatience, I have 2 quotes that hang near my desk. One is from Wendell Berry, the writer from Kentucky. And he was once asked something about what young people should do. And he said, well, you're in an emergency, but you're in the kind of emergency that requires patience. And being patient in an emergency, Wendell Berry says, is a terrible trial. And because the things that my colleagues and I promote as solutions involve, as we've been talking about, mutuality, weaving networks of connection, that's slow work, right? It's care work. It moves at the speed of trust. So you have to be patient while times are desperate. And whenever I don't want to do that, there's Wendell Berry on one side of my desk. On the other side of my desk is Grace Lee Boggs, the civil and human rights activist and leader from Detroit. And she once said, this won't be perfect, but given the exquisite nature of our interconnection, it's never a matter of critical mass. It's always a matter of critical connection. Um, and so that just reminds me, maybe we don't have enough numbers, maybe we don't, but think of every day how connections are being woven. Uh, when people go to the UN and one of those massive climate conferences, when a neighborhood right now in Minneapolis comes together to take care of one another and the most marginal, those are critical connections. So Grace Lee Boggs reminds me the connections are what matters, not the numbers. And Wendell reminds me to try to find grace with that patient emergency kind of feeling, or patience in emergency.
Beautiful. Well, before we close, is there anything else on your heart, on your mind that you'd like to share?
I would share something because it's been lifting my spirits a lot lately. Um, My colleagues and I are about to launch a new project that we call Seeds for the Future. And we define a seed for the future as when people work together in these patterns of connection and mutuality to meet an emergency. So, an example of one, we read about a beloved used bookstore in California that was flooded in a climate related storm and was going to close, and 5 young people got together and crowd-funded, a way to reopen it, but they restructured it as a worker-owned nonprofit bookstore. So you see 2 things at once, right? Responding to an emergency, but building a new structure, a new way of relating, and it's those ways of relating that are gonna carry us into the future. So that's why we call it a seed of the future. So because so our project is trying to understand what are those seeds, how better can they be nurtured and supported. Our funders are interested in how can funders, help with this emergence. So because we're working on so hard to launch this, I've just been seeing the seeds everywhere. And so I would just invite people to take that definition and just open your eyes. And most likely you're involved in the seed or many seeds. And it's just I would almost say thrilling to see how even in this dark time, or maybe because of this dark time, the ways that people are responding that are building the alternative while trying to mitigate the damage of the polycrisis. So that would be my ending thought is think what a seed for the future might be to you and look for them and see what you see.
Ah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing, again, your personal journey, but the ways that it can inspire and uplift us all and help clarify our own vision of what to look for and how we can contribute.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed talking, and I appreciated your questions, which I think get at the heart of a lot of what it takes to keep going. So thank you.
If you'd like to learn more about Beth and her work and where to find her book, you'll see it on screen with the links as well as in the show notes. So please join us again. Consider subscribing to be a part of these conversations and join this growing community because we're always better together. Thanks, everyone.